Welcome back. Mr. Shinofagbero Byron has worked with the UK Department for International Development for at least 10 years. He joins me now to weigh in on the debate concerning a possible Brexit and the implications for Nigeria. Now, the Brexit referendum takes place on Friday this week. So why do you think there's so much agitation for Britain to leave the EU?
Well, I think that history is being manifest as a result, or that occurrence is being manifest as a result of history. I mean, and it's a balance between nationalism, the growth of nationalism, and over the past 30 years that you've had a liberalism, of Europe. As you know, early 40s, the whole of the half of last century was, wars between European countries. It took time for them to build up. They built up. They built an element of peace, after the 50s, after the Second World War. The United Nations came in, first League of Nations, United Nations, and eventually this issue of looking at Europe, So it was a question of growing up from a fragmented Europe to a unified Europe under the Maastricht Treaty in 1998, I think. That was signed that actually brought all of them together formally. And, you see, life is swings. I mean, there's a pen when you have a bit of something. After a while, the tensions and the realities come in. Now, the recent Syrian, conflict and the immigration crisis, although most of the European countries, especially Britain, has always felt, the impact of immigration, but the pressures have not been so high as it has been, after the Syrian issue. And of course, when economies go down, when there's pressure on any society, nationals of that society tend to believe that, they're losing out because of others coming from outside to pick up their jobs, to pick up their spaces, to rob them of their identity. So what we are seeing is a resurgence of, an element of British nationalism.
A lot of Britain's neighbours are not eager for Britain to leave the EU. Is this because they would lose out the most in the end?
Well, a lot of British neighbours or partners are historical partners, and they have very strong business relations in the UK. By the UK being in the European Union, it gives them indirectly access to the European Union as well. So by being, of course, there's no doubt, no gainsaying that, access to, to Britain as a member of the Union gives whoever partners with Britain a larger access to a bigger market.
How strong do you think the British economy is to be able to stand outside of the European Union?
Yes, the British economy is largely predicated on trade and services, especially financial services. Now, the strength of an economy is always dependent on the economic managers. I know that the British can be very, very creative, and they can be very, very adaptive. We've had countries smaller than Britain and that have been very powerful economically. But it depends on how they pool their partnerships. For example, if Britain pulls out of the European Union, it gives them a freedom to trade with whoever they want under whatever terms they want. And it is possible that they even become the competition for the European Union. And a competition that might even that they may even be the lead in. Take, for example, I believe that in the next century, Africa is going to be the direction of a lot of trade.
How would a Brexit affect Nigeria?
Well, Nigeria is the second largest trading partner to Britain in Africa. I think that's about £6 billion in between both countries bilaterally. You also have British government agencies like DFID, Department for International Development, having close to about 40-something programs, valued about £232 million. Um, what will happen in the economy back home? If the economy in Britain shrinks, it will be more aggressive with its trade. If it's more aggressive with its trade, it's going to look to countries like Nigeria. You know, if Nigeria gets into a very huge and good partnership with Britain, then probably it'll, you know. In the development space, and that's why I came to mention DFID, when any time Britain has a slowdown in its own internal economy, then, you know, the support they give to development reduces, right? But you see, Britain has been committed to 0.07% of its gross national income into supporting development around the world, you know, and that's part of what funds agencies like DFID. Will it be able to maintain that 0.07%? That is the question. And if they are able to maintain it, it's good for Nigeria.
US President Barack Obama once said that it would be a lot easier and the US would rather relate with a Britain in the EU than a Britain outside of the EU.
Yes.
I mean, you have a larger, you know, network, you
Yes.
have a larger market
Yes.
if Britain is in the EU. And you know the
Yes.
NATTP partnership is coming up soon,
Yes.
maybe after President Barack Obama leaves office.
Yes.
Alone Britain, I mean, can such a situation also work for Nigeria? Can we also relate with what President Barack Obama is saying?
Yeah, well, you see, Nigeria and America were coming from two different spaces. We don't have the advantages that the US has over Britain and Europe. Closer relationships, economically at par. Politically, they're in NATO together, you know, and there's military ties, there's security ties, and a whole lot of fabric that ties them together. But from Nigeria's perspective, we also have an advantage in the sense that the US have to deal with so many countries. We don't have to directly deal with so many countries. Right. It's a question of how we deal with them. We have to reframe our partnership with Britain. Because we wouldn't say because we are dealing with Britain, then we wouldn't be able to deal with the European Union. So what we need to do for Nigeria needs to be thoroughly and truly independent in every sense of the word. To be able to think for itself and for its own interest. You see, I'll give you our foreign policy paradigm, you know, is faulty ab initio. Faulty in the sense that if you look at the Constitution, it says our foreign policy is predicated. Africa is the center of our foreign policy. How much of Africa do we control? So how do you put something that you don't control as the center of your own foreign policy when you yourself can be the center of your own policy? It would have been beautiful if Nigerian Constitution says Nigeria is the center of Nigeria's foreign policy and national interest. Then we know that it is Nigeria's interest. Then we deal with countries on that basis.
So is there a way Nigeria could lose out on Brexit?
Yes, we could lose out on Brexit, depending on the outcomes of Brexit. In the first place, I think the relationship between Nigeria and Britain, number one, is historical. It's cultural. There have been, you know, years of exchange. I don't think that relationship would directly weaken either way. Now, what will happen, however, is that the conditions under which that relationship is governed will change. Mm-hmm. You know, if Britain leaves the European Union, Britain is freer to make its own laws. That means the nationalists in Britain have won, and there'll be a tendency for stricter immigration laws. There'll be a tendency for deeper trade. And what I mean deeper trade, I mean Britain will always want to do, because whatever they're losing out in the union, they would want to gain in the different relationships they now have the independence of growing, including that with Nigeria. So they'll be looking at what's in it more for Britain as much as possible. And so if we're weak in terms of how we relate to Britain, either by having just Britain alone as a trade partner and not diversifying ourselves, If, for example, our own national interest is not clearly defined and is not Nigeria-centric, we would lose out. If we don't balance the relationship between Britain and Europe, because Britain will come for trade. Of course, we'll also have partners from Europe for trade. And, you know, if we are wise, we could sort of manage both relationships in a way that will pay Nigeria.
Still ahead on Diplomatic Channel. The Iraqi flag flies high in Fallujah after security forces declare victory over Islamic State militants. Please join us again.